Last week, Finweek looked at the subject of rental units for students and whether they represented a good investment for people looking for a passive investment. Now, this unleashed a flurry of input from readers who argued that the bigger challenge is finding high-quality letting agents who will actively protect your investment. Now, this week we look at how investors can find the right letting agent. Joining us for this conversation, we've got Finweeks Jessica Hubbard, Andrew Lucas from Just Letting Property Group, and Herschel Jawitz from Jawitz Property Group. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Herschel, I'll start off with you. Give us some insight into how the letting agent industry works.
So it's fundamentally the big difference between, for example, rentals and sales is that it doesn't work on an exclusive mandate process. So generally you'll find someone who owns a property looking to let it out will call in a number of agents and say, this is the rental I'm looking for, this is the type of lease, these are the terms and conditions, it might be furnished and unfurnished. Go out there and find me prospective tenants. And that's the easier part of the relationship between the owner, investor and the rental agent. It then starts to get a little more complicated, and that's when owners start to really need to differentiate in terms of what they're getting and how much they're going to have to pay. Because it's exactly like people giving their money to an asset manager. You know, you're entrusting your asset to an agent who's going to find you the right tenant. So, you know, firstly, just the credit checks, the previous landlord checks, the verification of income,
and this is for the letting agent and on the part of the property owner?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, you know, these are services that the letting agent should provide, or in fact must provide, to the owner. You know, it's not just an ad hoc, find me a person who can pay the rent, and as long as the deposit's in, I'm good to go, because generally that's going to unravel at some stage during the period of the lease. And the other part is to look at the legal documentation. So, you know, the lease has got to reflect the terms and conditions on which the owner wants to rent the property. Mm-hmm. It's got to govern issues like renewals, damage to property, issues related to insurance. If it's a sectional title, not only does the tenant have to adhere to the rules of the owner, but to the rules of the body corporate.
And of course, you have to have the tenants, potential tenants, actually agreeing to those. So you've got three parties you're moving to between, and everyone has to finally come to some sort of agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And invariably, you know, you've got a tenant who wants everything for very little, and you've got an owner who's trying to maximize the return on their investment at a fair rental without having to significantly improve the property, because for them it's a financial return they're looking at, and very often that relationship and those issues have to be managed by the letting agent, and how those issues are managed is going to be very much determined by the quality of the agent you choose.
Andrew, I mean, you know, I've had bad experiences in this, and you know, you have very pushy letting agents. They want to know an answer by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. You saw the house at 8 o'clock the night before, and you must sign that contract by 10 o'clock. And otherwise the house is not yours. I mean, are there bad letting agents that give the kind of industry, I'm calling it that, a bad name?
I don't think it's a bad agent that gives it the bad name. There are very many agents out there, and it's not a very regulated industry in the letting side, because just about anybody can become a letting agent. And it's unfortunately a lot of illegal letting agents who have been in the market, who have in fact taken people for a scam, in the form of a scam, that have given the letting agents somewhat of a bad ride. Overall, I think that the letting agents are well regulated within their own groups, and I think that one should rather choose a bigger letting agent company or estate agent company to manage your affairs, because they have the expertise to try and sift out all the bad issues that could cause bad experiences. Whereas the smaller business has no chance of doing that, or the smaller one-man shows have very little chance of doing that. Mm-hmm. Of course, training comes into it. The bigger companies spend a lot more money on training, of ensuring ethics are adhered to, etc., registrations with the Estate Agents Affairs Board, etc. So yeah, I do think that the letting agents have quite a bad picture painted about them, but it's often caused by a number of factors outside of their control.
Andrew, just one of the concerns among our readers was the fees involved when you go with the bigger guys.
Yes.
And they don't make it clear how they structure their fees and where the money is going. So could you just break it down and sort of describe what you're paying for when you go with a bigger letting agent and what one should look out for in a contract?
Well, there's two types of fees that are payable. There's a fee that's payable by the owner of the property, who would pay you either an upfront fee to manage the property or in fact pay you a fee to find the tenant themselves, for you to find the tenant, and they would then manage the property themselves on an ongoing basis. And then of course as a letting agency you would want to manage that property as an ongoing basis. The fees vary from not just from company to company but from province to province, and it really depends on the individual company what fees they would charge. From a tenant point of view, there are fees that may be paid, and once again there's certain legislation in place where in some provinces you can, in some provinces you can't charge a letting fee, for instance.
Is it fair that tenants should be paying the letting agent for getting their business? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, you could probably call it an administrative fee. So, you know, where the owner pays a commission to the letting agent to find the tenant, you know, they're drafting, so it would be no different to, you know, entering into a legal agreement with another company, and, you know, very often the drafting fees, as an example, are for the costs of the purchaser or the tenant in this case, but they shouldn't be significant fees. So, you know, and I'm not minimizing any monies paid, but, you know, generally the fees shouldn't be more than a couple of R100. So I think, you know, if the fees that a tenant has to pay are more than that, maybe 400 or 500 Rand as an administrative drafting fee, then certainly in my view, the tenant or prospective tenant should query what those fees are being used for and where they're going.
What about the escalation of fees for the letting agents over time? So, if, for example, if, you know, you bring on a letting agent and, you know, every year their price goes up, how is that built into contracts and clauses, and what is the general standard around that?
I don't think that there's anything built into the contract about escalation of fees. You have a rental agreement that is for a fixed period of time, or could be for an ongoing period of time. If it's an ongoing period of time, generally that contract would have the right to escalate the rent paid for the property as opposed to the fees paid. Once the rent contract has been signed, it is generally accepted that the owner would be paying the commission for that property.
As a percentage of the new rent?
As a percentage of the new rent. And that is an ongoing fee that is. Roughly in the industry it can range from anything from 8 to 12.5% in the industry that the owners are paying.
What distinguishes whether you should be paying 12% or 8%? I mean, how do you know whether 12% is kind of fair given the quality you're getting on board?
I mean, it varies from the level of services. So, you know, for example, there may be, it may depend on whether the property is being managed or not managed. So very often you'll find that if the property is being managed, there's not an upfront fee, but there's a monthly fee that the owner pays to collect the rent and manage the property and pay rates and taxes. So it varies, but I think, you know, as with all industries, and especially ours, where we spend most of our lives negotiating for a living, I think that every owner, every investor is entitled to say, this is what I expect, this is what you've delivered, this is now what's got to be paid. And if those services and the quality of tenant and the right credit checks and the property hasn't been managed in the appropriate manner, you know, the fee must come under scrutiny.
Just on the negotiating part of it that you mentioned, how much negotiating leverage does sort of the owner or the investor have? Do they have power, or who does the power reside with?
Listen, it depends, you know, and the nature of the rental industry is such that it's very different to sales, where generally it's an exclusive mandate, you're negotiating with one buyer, with the seller, it's a slightly slower process. Typically in a rental situation, I'm an investor, I phone 3 or 4 rental agents to rent out my property, I've got numerous people coming through, and it's similar to the experience you have. So I bring you to a property, you like it, I say to you, better submit an offer today, because I know there are 5 other rental agents working on it, and the owner's telling me that he's expecting an offer from another rental agent, and so it's a very different dynamic, and very often you can put in an offer now and have lost it by lunchtime.
Yeah.
Very often tenants will tell you they've got they want to give you an offer and they're viewing other properties, and you phone them and say, "Are you ready to put an offer?" And they tell you they find
it's
something.
very tricky.
It's a very fast paced.
And that's why, of course, I talk about this frenetic way.
It is
which they
frenetic.
deem
The
it.
rental market is very different. It's very much more frenetic. It's much more fastest finger first, early bird catches the worm.
Yeah.
Who has the power in the negotiating process? It depends, you know. So, I mean, it depends. Has the property been standing empty for a long time? How close is the rental to what the owner is asking? You know, the closer the rental is to what the owner is asking, you might find that the agent has slightly more power. But I think we certainly look at it as, you know, everyone's got to come out feeling like they've got a fair deal. The owner's getting a good return, tenants paying a fair rental, and we've been remunerated accordingly.
I often think that letting agents are almost, you know, have to have a degree in law to write those contracts and understand it. But Andrew, just 30 seconds for you. How do you cancel a contract with a letting agent?
It's very difficult to cancel a contract with a letting agent. Obviously, the contract is cancelable, but you'd have to pay a penalty if you wanted to cancel it early. And those fees would have to be in the contract for it to be enforceable. Otherwise, it would not be enforceable to, in fact, pay a cancellation fee.